Now back in the mountains over around Waynesville, North Carolina, back in the Balsam Mountains, years ago, there was a creature named Boojam. Now Boojam was a hairy old creature, something like Bigfoot out west. People would see him running through the hills, said he looked a little bit like a black bear. Long black hair on him, big claws. He seemed almost human, but not quite human. Now Boojam would occasionally steal a young pig from a farmer, or steal some corn out of the field, or maybe a pumpkin or some squash. People would see him. Some people even hunted Boojam. They said he wasn't human. Other people said he was, that maybe he was just a lost child that grew up in the woods with the bears. And for years and years, people would hunt and search and talk about Boojam, but no one ever actually had evidence of him. No one took a photograph of him, or could even show up with a good track or a bit of his hair or something. But everybody over there around the Balsams believed in Boojam. And Boojam was very lonely. And from time to time he would approach the cabin of isolated farmers over there, especially if they had young daughters, and try to strike up a conversation with a young girl in a cornfield. But of course he always frightened them, and they would run home, and their fathers would get out their guns and start shooting back in the woods towards where Boojam had been. But finally, one day there was one girl named Annie. Now Annie, when she saw Boojam one day in the pumpkin patch, she felt sorry for him. He had the biggest, sorriest, saddest, droopiest eyes of any creature she'd ever seen. And he didn't look mean, he just looked sad to her. So Annie began to talk to him and hang out some with Boojam, and she decided that he really was a pretty good fellow, and was probably human after all. And it wasn't long before Annie and Boojam fell in love. Now, Boojam was known to hoard gold and gemstones. See, all back in the mountains there's rubies and emeralds and sapphires found in the creek. And for years and years, Boojam had been collecting them into a treasure trove somewhere in a cave back there in Haywood County. Well, he would bring them as gifts to Annie. And finally, Annie agreed to be his wife, and they left and lived in the laurel thickets. No one knew quite where Boojam and Annie lived. But Annie would call for Boojam when he went off on his hunting trips looking for rubies and emeralds. She would go through the mountains hollering for him, "Boojam! Boojam!" and hooting and hollering. And that's where the word Hootenanny comes from, because of Hootin' Annie as she was looking for Boojam back in the mountains. Nobody ever knew quite what happened to Boojam and Annie. No one saw them after a while. But to this day, they still see creatures back there on the Balsam Mountains on those high, craggy tops that look a little bit like a human and a little bit like a bear with long, black, shaggy hair. And some people say those are the children of Boojam and Annie. And if you ever hiking back in the Balsams and you hear a little rustle in the bushes and you catch sight of something black slipping into the woods, it might be a bear, or it might be Boojam.